Hello kids, how are you? In the class today we're going to speak about modal verbs. So, what are modal verbs? They are like a special type of verbs. Why are they special? Because they act in different way than the normal or regular verbs, and they function or they work in different ways too. So, what is the idea of a modal verb? This kind of verbs add extra information to other verbs. For example, possibility or obligation or suggestions. Let's see an example. Let's suppose that I tell you, see you tomorrow, or I see you tomorrow, te veo mañana. That gives me the idea that I am definitely going to see you tomorrow. But if the sentence is, I could see you tomorrow, yo podría verte mañana, that gives me the idea that there is a possibility or a probability that I see you tomorrow, but I am not so sure. In another example, I can say, I must see you tomorrow, debo verte mañana. And this gives me the idea that it is like a strong necessity, something that I have to do. So, with these examples, you can see how different modal verbs help us to give different meanings to a sentence. Okay, so that is the idea of a modal verb. How many modal verbs are? There are 9 different modal verbs. Which are they? They are can, could, may, might, will, would, shall, should, and must. Those are the modal verbs, okay? They work, as I told you before, they work in a different way as the rest of the verbs. They have special grammatical rules. Which are these rules? Rule number 1. Modal verbs are always followed by a verb in infinitive without to. Without to. What is that? For example, I can say, I must see you tomorrow. So, here I have the modal verb, and the second verb is in infinitive, always in infinitive, and without to. I cannot say, I must to see you tomorrow, or I cannot say, I must seeing you tomorrow, okay? Always the verb in the bare infinitive. Good. What is rule number 2? Modal verbs don't have tenses, okay? So, what does it mean? It means that I cannot say them, for example, in the past, or I cannot say them in the present perfect. That it is not possible. Or I cannot say them in the future. Okay? So, for example, if I have must and I want to say it in the past, or like an activity that I had to do in the past, I cannot say musted. Okay? It doesn't exist. So, what do I do if I want to speak in different tenses? We are going to study that later, okay? But for now, keep the idea that they do not have tenses. So if I say must, or if I say should, or can, or could, it is only the meaning of that word. There are some exceptions, almost all the rules in English. For example, in some cases, could is the past of can. So I can say, for example, I can speak English now, but I couldn't speak English when I was 2. But that is like an exception. It is not the only use of could. Okay, let's see rule number 3 and the last. Modal verbs are auxiliary verbs. What does it mean? As they are auxiliary verbs, we use the same modal verbs to make the negative and to make the interrogative form. I can say can't, or couldn't, or mustn't, or shouldn't, okay? In the case of may and might, they are not usually used in the short form, always in the full form in negative. So it is more common to say may not or might not than the short form mightn't, all right? Never mind, it is something that we're going to study later, but just you to keep in your mind. And if I want to make the question, I change the order of the word in the sentence. For example, can I go out tonight? Or would you like to come with me? Okay, so in this case, for the questions, I do not use extra auxiliaries like do or did. I always use the same modal verb to make the question and the negative. Let's write an example just for you to remember. I shouldn't, and this I have the modal verb in negative. I shouldn't keep going, for example. I have, in this case, rule number 1, because the modal verb is followed by a verb without to. And rule number 3, as it is an auxiliary, I use the same modal verb to make the negative, okay? Let's see the question. Should I keep going? And in this case, I start the question with the modal verb because it is an auxiliary verb. Very well, so that is part 1 of modal verbs, that is the basics of modal verbs. Let's move now to part 2, which is the meanings of modal verbs. Okay, the meanings. There are 9 modal verbs, and in general, there are 9 meanings for modal verbs. But unfortunately, it is not that one modal verb means one thing, but one modal verb can mean a lot of different things, and one meaning can be expressed by different modal verbs. So this makes us difficult to work with modal verbs, so they are not so simple as we can imagine. Okay, but we're going to see some clues and some ideas to make them easier. Okay, let's see one of the most common use for modal verbs, which is asking for permission. Yes? For example, can I go to the bathroom, teacher? So in this case, you are asking for permission, and pay attention that we use the modal verb can. Yes? It is not the only one, we are going to see that later, but it is an example. So we have permission as one of the uses. Ask for permission. Very well. Another use is to express possibility or impossibility. It means that something can or cannot happen. Yes? For example, I could say, using could, let's write here possibility. If I'd say, I could could go out tonight, but I'm not so sure. So maybe it happens, or it could rain tomorrow. I have the idea that it's going to happen, but I'm not sure if it is going to happen or not. Exists the possibility, okay? So it might happen or it might not happen. As I am speaking, pay attention to all the modal verbs that I am using while I speak to you, okay? Very good. The third use is to give advice or suggestions. In this case, we usually use the modal verb should. And I told you, if you feel so bad, you should go to see a doctor. So in this case, I am giving like a recommendation to a person. And in this case, we use modal verbs too. Another is to express certainty. Or the opposite, uncertainty. What is that? It means that I am sure that something must be like that, or I am sure that something cannot be like that. Yes? For example, I could say it's been raining 3 days so far, so all my plants must be rotten. Okay? Rotten means like podrido. So my plants must be rotten. Deben estar podridas. I suppose that because as it has been raining so much, that makes me the idea that it is not so good for my plants. Okay? Or I could also say, that can't be my cousin who is coming there because he is at school right now. I am sure that he can't be that person. Good, let's move on. Then we have probability as another use. Probability. What is that? Probability. Do not confuse with possibility. Probability is that if something is going to happen, I have like different, let's see, percentage that it is probable to happen. So I could say it might rain tomorrow, or it is going to rain tomorrow, or it will rain tomorrow. And in one case, I am certain that it's going to happen, like 100%. In other case, I am not so certain, let's see, like 80, 70, 50%. So with different modal verbs, I express different grades of probability that something happens. Did you understand so far? Too much information? Okay, remember that you can always pause the video and write whatever you want and make it clear for you. And we're going to see it in classes too. Okay, so don't panic. Very well. Another is to express willingness. Willingness. It is like similar to give permission. I let someone to do something, or I refuse. It means that I don't let that person to do another thing. Okay? And then we have other use like is to make requests and offers. Yes. For in this case we use shall, which is not so commonly used, but it is used for that. For example, shall I help you? It means that do you want me to help you? Okay? It is not common, but it is still used. And then we have obligation. Yes, I have space. For example, you must hand your homework before Monday. It is an obligation, something that I told you to do, and you have to do it, okay? And in this case, we use must. And finally, we have ability or inability. Ability. What is that? It means that you can or cannot do something. For example, I can speak English, but I cannot speak French. Okay, I have that ability of speaking one language, but I do not have the ability of speaking a different language. How is it going so far? Too much information? Okay, don't panic. We're going to see it step by step, and with the time you will get used to them and see they are not so difficult. One recommendation with modal verbs is that it is not useful to translate it on your own language. Sometimes if you translate them, it's going to be complicated and difficult to understand. As they have a lot of different meanings, it is very important to understand the context of the lesson. So do not always say, for example, yes, can means puedo. It is not the only meaning, okay? It has different meanings depending on the context. So always read the complete sentence and not just the modal verb, okay? That is something helpful. Okay, and finally, we have semi-modals. So, what are semi-modals? They are some verbs that do not have all the characteristics of a modal verb, but they have a similar meaning to them. So sometimes they can replace them. Okay? For example, I could say, you must hand your homework today, or I could say, you have to hand the homework today. So in this example, must and have to express the same idea of obligation. Must is a modal verb and have to is a semi-modal. Why is that? Because have, as we know it, is a common verb, and I could say that in the past. For example, I could say, you have to hand your homework yesterday. Vos tenías que entregar la tarea ayer. Or I could say, you will have to hand your homework next week. Tendrás que entregar la tarea mañana. So I can say it with have to, but I cannot say it in different tenses with must. So there are some semi-modal verbs that we are going to learn step by step. So I am not going to teach you them in this video, but we are going to say them as we study the rest of the modal verbs, okay? But it is important for you to know that they exist. They do not have all the rules that modal verbs have. We can replace them in some cases. They are similar in meaning, but they are not exactly the same. So modal verbs are a huge world of things to learn, to understand, and they are like complicated to use, but be patient. We are going to learn them together step by step, okay? So see you in class where we're going to review the meaning of these things and to work all together to see if you understand them or not. Okay, thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.